computer. There we go. So good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, whatever time it happens to be where you are. I'm going to share my slide deck screen here. Of course, Google is now not participating with us today. So in any case, this is the April CentOS SIG meeting. Glad everybody could make it. Once again, I apologize for this being a Friday afternoon or evening in Europe, and that was not intentional, but we had two very exciting events go on. So Red Hat has joined AGL. I don't know that we're going to be at the AGL meeting in person. I'm planning to at least dial in for it. It's going to be at a terrible time for my time. But that's a good question. We should actually bring that up. I'm actually personally, I'm much more interested in the AGL all member meeting in Honolulu this summer. So if we can, at least.
Why do you prefer Honolulu to Berlin, Jeffro? I mean, come on, let's dig down into this.
Only because it's a little bit closer from where I am on the west coast.
Good answer. Good answer.
Yeah, good answer. Yeah. The one of Berlin is going to be organized within Mercedes offices. It's a good opportunity to meet people from Mercedes.
That's true. That is very true.
Which is not going to be the case in Honolulu. Yeah.
I will say that Red Hat as an organization hasn't yet decided how deeply we're going to be involved in the day-to-day with AGL. I know I've been on the mailing lists, for 10 years now, almost 10 years. But I don't know what exactly we're going to be doing from the point of view of the SIG and from the point of view of our product. A lot of those things are kind of still up in the air. Ian, I would say that there's no Hawaii-based automakers yet. The field is wide open, especially with all of the EV startups that are popping up. There are many options, and I don't want to put any limit.
I could let this bleed over into my understanding of the relative cost of electricity in Hawaii versus, say, Detroit. But anyway, that's off topic for this.
They have a lot of sunshine there.
Yes, they do. Yeah, they're doing very interesting stuff.
Yep. And the wave energy stuff that they've been doing off the coast there has been fantastic. They've improved the efficiency of the wave generators quite a lot. So all right, well, I have just a very quick agenda. I don't actually have a whole lot. We have plenty of room for talk this time. I thought we would dive in, take a look at the actions that we had set out in March, create robust community guidelines and other documentation, and I'm happy to report that some of that has actually been done. When I went to the documentation, I noticed that there actually is a whole section, a whole page on contributing to the Automotive SIG repository and how to use Git and all this stuff. And I think the only thing we have left as far as contributions, this is in addition to the CentOS stream contrib documentation and the actual CentOS documentation guide, the contribution guide. The only thing left for us to do, I think, is to add a contributing file at the top, which we will do hopefully over the next week, and then we can actually call that goal met for the spring. And I actually did update the wiki page. The wiki page, there is now a meetings page specific that has all of the different recordings from all of the past CentOS Automotive SIG meetings. If anybody has any questions or issues with that, just let me know. I would like to continue building out the wiki page as our kind of central hub for information about the SIG from an administrative point of view. And then, of course, there's the documentation page, which has all of the information from a technical point of view. And then, of course, the repo that has the actual bits. So, doing good. Let's dive real quick into a technical status update. Last month we announced the AutoSD distribution availability as the sort of output of the SIG. I think it's looking great. The documentation has been really built out, as we were just saying. I know that Laura has put a lot of work into it. I think Alex has put a ton of work into it. I know a bunch of these pages came from him. And so please take a look. There's links in most places. I love the pictures that Pierre has added too. I think that it's really coming along very, very well. The CI pipeline is still a work in progress. It is progressing. Actually, I should just hand this over to Pierre or Ian if one of you guys want to take a look, take a whack at it.
I'm hoping Pierre can do that. If not,
I can step in. I have been away from keyboard for most of the week, so if things have changed recently, I may not have the latest news. But yeah, Jeffrey has mentioned it. We've worked quite a bit on the documentation. Alex has put quite some work on all the area around the OS build. So if you're not familiar, OS3, sorry. So if you're not familiar with OS3, the documentation gives you a good understanding of what it is capable of. And one of the most recent additions is also documentation and examples on how you can have a system that doesn't boot properly automatically reboot to the previous commit, to the previous state of the system. So since the way OS3 works, it's atomic. It's either your V1 or V2, but you're nowhere in between there. So you can reboot to V2, and if that doesn't work, you reboot back to V1. That is a great piece of documentation. I still have myself to go through it and test it to see it live. But it's very nice to see this here. The CI pipeline is now is working. It's progressing. We have a change in the methodology that we are using. So back until I believe a couple of days ago, we had a change every time that there was a package change in CentOS Stream, built in CentOS Stream. We would be updating a file in the Automotive SIG repo, and that would trigger the CI run. This has led to a number of problems. One of them being like if you update package A and then package B and package B depend on A, with the mechanism you had two different merge requests, one for A, one for B, and there was no way to link to test B on the top of A without merging first A and then B and then doing the rebase and all this distance. So that has led to a number of merge requests that were accumulating. That was not ideal. So what we're doing now is instead of doing on a build, we're doing on a daily basis on the CentOS compose. So we know that we have a set of packages that has passed composed on the CentOS Stream side. So we are no longer updating one package, but we're updating a list of packages at once. And the idea is to have this automatically merge if they pass CI, because there is no way one of us is going to go look at the changes here and say, well, which is updating to 1.34.5 and less is updating to 2.10.15, but I want which and not less. So the idea is that if that pass CI, it will be automatically updated, and for TOSD, we believe this is fine. The testing part is still in progress. That is being worked on, as well as the downloadable sample images. So if you go to autosd.centos.org, you see a sample images folder, you see some content in there, but that is still not something that we are satisfied with. One of the things that we are dissatisfied about it's currently not compressed. So you're downloading short of 10 gigs of data just for an image. So that's not something we want to go further. And I believe the location of these images is due to change in the long term. So once we have something ready, we'll announce it, and probably through the weekly newsletter, autosd.sig.centos.org. Sorry, Jeffrey. Okay. And so once we have something ready, we'll announce it and we'll produce through the weekly newsletter. But if you've seen it before, this is what it is. But don't assume that it is the final location or that it is the final content. We're not there yet. And with this, I don't know if Alex, Ian, or someone else wants to add to this, but that's it on my side.
I'll ask a brief detailed question on that. Alex, were you going to chime in with something about that?
I don't have that. That's about
Okay.
what I had to say.
Yeah. So Pierre, essentially, for a while we were looking at each discrete package build that was a candidate for inclusion in CentOS 9 Stream, which is our primary source of updates, and those are sort of backing up. And so now you're saying, at the moment, the unit of change that you're looking at is based on the nightly compose of CentOS 9 Stream. Okay, that's interesting. I had thought, I knew there was another thing in the running, which was essentially to still look at every single package, but never gate, essentially, like leave open the possibility that we would do that at some point, but essentially always pass to sort of preserve visibility into the package by package changes. So I ask about that because actually, oh, go ahead.
I think the long-term idea is to do that, but actually push it even further so that already when you open a PR against Git, basically, you run the test then and gate them even earlier.
Yeah,
but none of this is active yet. Right now, we just do the compose.
Yeah. Well, I was it tied back to. Go ahead, Pierre. Sorry.
The compose had a different aspect as well. It was the smallest step to fixing the situation. It was not the whole journey to fixing and making it better, but it was the smallest step we could do to see if that was improving something. If it's not, then we can, do on following steps.
Yes. No, I think I'm totally like far better to have right now an auto SD that reflects the latest things that are coming out of CentOS 9 Stream than to back up on a not yet completely baked gating mechanism. So no, that I was going to tie it also to the question. There was a question actually in the pre-formal meeting start time about documentation and developer guide and whatnot. And the next place I was going to take that actually was, I do wonder, I'm not clear the extent to which we have documentation on just the broader CentOS Stream side about how to be a developer in that context. I know that, for example, it's now possible to submit a PR against a package in CentOS 9 Stream, whether you're a Red Hat employee or not. And I think we're endeavoring to mirror, to the extent possible, the workflows from Stream in CentOS for the automotive product. And that's what AutoSD is, essentially. So I don't know that we're in a position really to do that right now, especially since we only have one package. It's a very important one, Clark Williams, but it's only the kernel. So just tie it back to that as well, that eventually we will have this interesting phenomenon where we have a stream of updates from CentOS that aren't entirely under our control. We'll have another stream of updates from packages that Red Hat is providing that are specific to automotive. Right now, it's just the kernel. And we need to sort of synthesize that into something that is an evolved artifact for AutoSD that incorporates both of them. So it'll be fun.
There is one thing also that has, so it should have progressed a lot more, but since I was away from keyboard this week, it has progressed, but not as much as I would have liked. It's the automotive namespace under gitlab.com/CentOS. So I've been made an admin on the CentOS namespace on GitLab, which means, and we now have the Automotive SIG has volunteered to help the CentOS infrastructure run the edges on the CentOS on the use of the CentOS namespace in GitLab, which means we should have everything we need to actually create the automotive namespace on CentOS on gitlab.com/CentOS and start using it. There is some good practices that needed to be written. There were some agreements on how do we handle groups and authentications, access, and all these kind of things. I think we are at a point where everything has been agreed upon, or at least everything that we foreseen has been agreed upon, and the rest will be trial and error since figuring things out and documenting them as we go. So basically, we should have the automotive. We should be able to start using the automotive namespace under CentOS early next week. That's I have all the access. We have all the agreements. Now it's a matter of actually creating the namespace, linking it to the CentOS account system, and then starting to create the hierarchy underneath it for our needs. And I know Francisco was eager and has been asking me for feedback about this. And I'm sorry I didn't get back to you, but it's been a not so productive week on my hand. Let's put it this way. But that part has progressed. There is hope.
Yes, Laura.
I don't understand the implication of what Pierre just said. Does it mean that we're not going to use the Automotive SIG repo anymore? Can you explain that to me?
So currently the Automotive SIG repo is under the Red Hat namespace, gitlab.com/redhat/automotive. That namespace is only accessible to Red Hat employee. But the SIG is a CentOS SIG who contains or can contain more than just Red Hat employees. So we want to be able to move. We basically want to create probably the same structure, but instead of being under gitlab.com/redhat/automotive, it will be gitlab.com/CentOS/automotive. The difference is you're going to have to use a CentOS account, the CentOS account system instead of the Red Hat account system. We will be able to invite people that are not Red Hatters as long as they have a CentOS account. We will be, all the access control will be done from the CentOS account system instead of being the Red Hat LDAP and all these kind of things. So the idea is the same. We use, it will be very much like the way it works with Red Hat currently. In Red Hat, we are told that the access should be handled by groups. These groups should be defined in LDAP, while CentOS has the same policy. The access should be defined by groups. These groups should be defined in CentOS LDAPs, which is the accounts.centos.org.
Thank you.
See if this makes it
So, Pierre, is it fair, like, are we essentially, the SIG repo, you want to be something that's more broadly available, and so this will become it? Okay, good.
Yeah.
And this is, I will admit, like Laura Jean, being confused by this as well. And it really was down to access rights. And it also overlapped with some challenges we had about the package build infrastructure itself, which was very, very detailed and technical and not really, there was no philosophical element to this change. It was very practical, yes? It isn't, none of this reflects a change in the way that we would like the SIG to operate or what our goals or mission are. It was simply putting it in a place in the infrastructure that was more amenable to this collaboration. Is that a fair summary? Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
That also means the kernel team will be able to start making use of this space. I know they've been eager to do that, so we should be able to answer this request.
That's a good question. Laura, do you get your question answered about documentation, or maybe at least as answered as we can make it from the Open Automotive SIG?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it depends on, what we're going to do in the future from a Red Hat perspective for Rivos. So the main concern that we have is we don't want to write two sets of docs.
Right.
We want to reuse as much as possible. We don't know 100% how to do that yet, because if it's for Auto SD, we're not going to be calling it Red Hat in-vehicle operating system. It's going to be called Auto SD or Automotive SIG or whatever we're calling it on that side. So, we'd like to have a variable that changes it between the repos if we are using the same content. And if we're not using the same content, I guess the question would be, well, why? Just because it takes a lot of time to develop content, and it's risky when you have to update it in two places if things change. So as much reuse as possible is our goal. So yeah, I think we're going to just have to talk about it more. Maybe this is not the right time to do that, but I'll talk to my other tech writers, and I know Felicia is working on something with her toolchain group right now to even figure out, if the mirroring or the syncing and retaining variable definitions is even possible. She's working with someone named Wanhei. I have not met that person, so I don't know exactly what they've discussed. I haven't been privy to those conversations yet. So I think the short answer is we'll have to continue talking about this.
Yeah. Well, I think this is having it come up here in the SIG meeting where we have some folks who aren't from Red Hat is a good option to discuss it, because it's great to get some ideas about what people do expect from documentation. Do you just expect, essentially man pages and API docs, or are you looking for developer documentation? And much more esoteric and a lot more involved. So we'd love any feedback that anybody on the call would like to provide.
I think any of the Red Hatters on the call have probably been invited by Shweta to review the documentation content plan, the customer content plan. So I do urge you to take a look at that. I believe she closed the window for comments last week, but nothing in docs is ever final.
Right. Especially not in the stream situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have a whole lot else to on the agenda as far as content goes. We've got the drawings that Pierre did that I think everybody has probably seen a couple of times, just explaining how AutoSD works. And then I just had down here that the goals, to show some progress on the goals that we have set out for 2022. That we do have some contribution guidelines now and some more specific documentation, which is great. We can always default back to talking about hardware and porting, because that's where we usually end up in these meetings, because hardware is very interesting, and of course it's all kind of mythical right now because of the chip shortage. And I can also go over some of the other open source initiatives that Red Hat has been involved with to see where else we intersect with some of the other folks on the call. But the question is, where does everybody want to go with this meeting? Any preferences, any thoughts? We can keep talking about the technical aspects of the AutoSD too.
I do have one more docs thing to bring up.
Sure.
And I'm sorry I've let this drop, but the RHEL developer guide has a section about RHEL and its upstream products. So the Ribose folks, we folks need to review that to see how much of that is reusable and true for Ribose. So I will send another invitation to take a look at that to you, Jeffro, Ian, Pierre, and anyone else on this call who would like to be involved in that review. I think that's one thing that we could tie up pretty quickly. I'm sorry, zip up pretty quickly. It's not that big a section.
Okay.
So this is Philip talking. Clearly, one area where we see more and more requirement is on how we're going to interface safety with security, which translates in having a real-time operating system and a rich operating system. So for us, Linux. Some open source groups, so Covesa was used to be named Genevi. Okay, they changed the name recently. So they have a couple of groups that, in my opinion, are really meaningful. The most well-known is probably VSS, which is a normalization of the data within a car. And this one is about telemetry and is targeting on how we can, in fact, do safety, at least low-level safety like ASIL-B within Linux, which I mean how we can address the certification and the audit of the process.
Okay, that must be encapsulated in these slide decks. Do you know much about the methodology towards functional safety?
I would say partially. I cannot pretend to be an expert, but you know, we've been talking with this guy for a while. I just give you a very simple example that we've been facing recently. So you have a camera that is in charge of making sure that the driver is not sleeping or is not, you know, using his mobile phone.
Mhm.
So this camera needs to take 20 images per second in order the AI algorithm to be accurate enough to get an acceptable response from the camera. So this is done within an FPGA. So the AI algorithm as such run in a completely separated hardware. And Linux is in charge of monitoring that the safety device is acting correctly. Which means that Linux is in charge of making sure that the camera is effectively generating 20 images per second, and also is in charge of collecting the high-level information like the driver is not is reading his phone, so you have to warn him, and you have to, for example, stop the autopilot. So that's typically the kind of interactions that we are facing in between both worlds.
Okay. Do you know if this is an open source project, this Automotive project?
So Covesa is specifying API. They do not impose, because that's Geneva historically. So they define API use cases, and they do not really provide any software as such. They tried in the past, but with little success. But clearly there is a demand here, as well as there is a very strong demand on how we can certify in a repeated way and automated way the certification, whether they are safety or security certification, which is one of the big showstoppers that people have today. And in fact, there is one project that we are looking at that is going in that direction, which is a NIST. Okay, so the NIST is that's a US a governmental organization, and they are working on specifying a language to describe, you know, the safety and security event in such a manner that you can do an introspection with an automat. And the idea is that, you know, if you have certified version 1, if you apply security patch for version 1.1, then you can process the certification automatically.
I do remember running across this. It was very specific to automated control systems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
I remember looking at this in the context of manufacturing as well.
for what I know, it is the only attempt today to have a normalized language to describe your rule and the outcome of the rule. But maybe there are others, but I'm just not aware of them. Yeah. But it's probably one of the biggest, if in my opinion, it is even the biggest showstopper for Linux adoption in the automotive industry. It is how you're going to certify your process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is certainly true, and it's something that that we have been working on over the last year or so. That's the basis of Red Hat's relationship with Exida, to try to develop a methodology towards functional safety that follows all of these things as well, and can accommodate Linux. I'm not sure everybody on the call knows. Also, there's also a second effort within the ISO community to make an update to ISO 26262. It's called an ISO pass process, and changing an international standard takes a very long time. So,
yeah, it's very long. Yeah.
yeah, this has actually been going on for quite a long time though, and it's in draft mode at this point. So I believe it was I'm just coming from the ELISA workshop um, this past week. I believe there is a timeline now that they're looking for the beginning of next year to be in final draft mode, and towards I think August or September next year, 2023, to be finalized. It's very hard to actually book, to be accurate with a calendar around a standards process, but that's the idea.
But we see a big shift, and I think that's quite recent. That device that were used to be purely safety oriented, like a LiDAR, for example. LiDAR in the past were running a real-time operating system plus something like QNX or some kind of heavy POSIX real-time proprietary OS. And now they are willing to replace that with Linux. So clearly, the real-time operating system is still doing the point measurement and eventually is notifying the car that it should brake. But all the high-level function, like recomposing the point to say this is a pedestrian, this is a car, this is a bus, this is a truck, this can be done by Linux, and this required to have specification. So people today have proof of concept; they know they can do it. But they have showstopper to go in production.
Functional safety is definitely a big showstopper, as it should be. I mean, that's the reason why we, as a society, we've created functional safety standards in order to be showstoppers for things like this.
Yeah, I think it's like any security, constraints. It has good and bad part. You also have a lot of people that try to protect their business, and when you do a real analysis, a real risk analysis of most of the requirement, a huge part of them can be removed from the actual product because they are not justified. So they and clearly the German manufacturer have been very good at adding constraints on the system. I think Tesla has shown the way or the path to make system cheaper by really only implementing what was necessary. And now everyone is going to go through that path as well. So
I'm not personally convinced that that's the right path to go, but
yeah, it's a cheap path to go. Yeah, and Tesla is not too bad. I'm sure that some of the Chinese car are even less strict on what they implement. So yeah.
I would say it's cheap in the development cycle. It's maybe less cheap in the litigation cycle afterwards. But, so you're basically just offsetting the cost to pay lawyers. So here's actually a question for Philip. I know that everybody's tracking the real-time work going into the mainline Linux kernel.
Yeah.
Do you have an impression that will make it easier to do things like functional safety, or do you think it's going to make it more complex?
Honestly, no. Okay, it's not a bad thing. Okay, let's be clear. But to be honest, we did not really had issue with real time for quite a long time now. Okay, because we did not had like a clean API to solve the problem, but we've been able to solve the problem by other manner with some specific configuration, some low-level code, even a specific kernel driver. So I don't see like this providing a lot of new functionality for us. It is a good thing if you have a strong legacy code coming from Wind River or other real-time operating system, and you want to port them on Linux, because then you have a much shorter path. So honestly, I think it is a good idea, and it is clearly necessary anyway, because if you want to go for safety, they're going to request that. But for me, that was not the biggest showstopper. Okay, the biggest showstopper is more on the audit side, and we still have strong requirement for running real-time operating system like Zephyr or Autosar in either dedicated core or a microcontroller that run on the same SOC or even on a different SOC. And for political and, the organization is designed in such a way that the person that is in charge of the brake is not going to run with the same team that is running the AVI. So before they share the same processor, it's going to take a very, very long time. But yeah, so I see it as a nice to have feature. I'm very happy they made it, because we had to maintain that patch, and it was not an easy patch to maintain. So this problem is solved out, but it's not going to change the world. Yeah, it's
Yeah. I've actually thought over the years that maybe real time was not quite the right term anymore. I mean, the value in it is making a system deterministic. Most
Well, that's kind of the definition of real time, Jeffro.
certainly, but
Determinism, being on time.
Yeah, being on time. Yeah, and so yeah, we'll see. Obviously, people are going to use it. Okay, it's a new functionality. It does a job. It makes your life easier in some cases. But at the end of the day, you still have the same amount of power. Okay. You also have very complex processor with multi-core, and you might be locked for I/O, but in a driver in many different places. So to be honest, I think Opti, that help us to provide, a secure boot and a chain of trust was far more important, because that was a showstopper. I think real time was a showstopper, when I still had, dark hair. But I can start my camera, so people who don't know me will see that I have now completely white hair, and I think this problem has disappeared with the color of my hair. Okay, it's no, but we still have requirement on the other hand. In the automotive sector, they're still very mean, and so they still want to run the computer at 90% of their hardware capability. And we had discussion recently with one potential customer, and we were asking, in between 1% and 3% of the resources to implement virtualization, and the answer was, that's too much. Okay, we cannot give you that. Okay, so
that is a very specific economy, but it's
I'm not sure they save money. In fact, they may lose money by doing that, but yeah, that's another story. Yeah. We are small companies. The customer is always right. Okay, we're not going to say the customer is wrong. Okay,
sure.
If there are any EOM listening to this talk, I agree with whatever they say. Okay.
One other question I was wondering about, as far as the mainline kernel work, I know that the Linatronics was the organization that was doing that, and they were very recently acquired by Intel.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're being run as a wholly owned subsidiary.
Yeah.
So Thomas and I talked a bit right after it happened, and of course I was giving him a hard time because we got acquired by IBM, and he gave me a whole load of grief on that. So I felt like I had to give him some back. But I don't think there's going to be a ton of direction given from Intel. I think it was almost an acquire to hire sort of thing. So I don't see. I mean, the plan, in case anyone doesn't know, is that we should be able to build a preempt RT kernel in the 5.20 release, and we're currently working on 5.18 now. That, of course, is dependent on a lot of things. Print K reared its ugly head about a year ago, and we're still dealing with the fallout of that. The random driver is being totally overhauled, and it touches everything in the crypto world. So, yeah, things could be delayed. I really wouldn't bet the farm on it being 5.20. But it's as close as I've ever seen us get in 15 years. So, but to get to your original point, I don't necessarily think that the acquisition of Linatronics was a bad thing. I think
I
it
think
means
it's great for, no, I think it's Linetronics, and it's probably great for Intel.
Yeah.
My concern, of course, is for the community. But I know that Thomas has been a pretty good steward of that over the years. I don't think that he would.
yeah. Well, I mean, originally Red Hat contracted with him,
Mm-hmm.
and that was when we first started working on the preempt RT stuff and delivering a real-time kernel from Red Hat.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, we said, okay, fine, we've done enough. And then that was when the Linux Foundation real-time project was formed
Mm-hmm.
to continue funding. So, but I mean, I think this means that they'll take it to the end, and then the next step is to figure out how we treat real-time in upstream.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of debate going on as to whether that should be a subsystem, even though it has threads in just about every piece of the kernel. So interesting times.
It is very interesting. I'm very interested to see how it unfolds.
But I agree that it is not a requirement for functional safety.
Mm-hmm.
Those are they tangentially touch, but you can do functional safety inside a stock kernel.
Maybe correlation rather than causation.
Yes.
Hello. I have a random thing. I just wanted to jump in. I don't know if there's a good place to say this, but I've been running a group that is working on improving Fedora and Raspberry Pi, among other things. And so we presented to Mike McGrath a couple of months ago, and about trying to potentially support Fedora and CentOS Stream, and if we could make the case, even RHEL on the Raspberry Pi. And then he had suggested supporting CentOS Stream on the Raspberry Pi. And in terms of next steps, he basically said, come over here, I'm pretty sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so there's been some conflicts with this meeting, and I haven't been able to make it over. But, now I'm here. I don't know if Julia Denham was here at one of these meetings. She was also, I don't know if she said something about this, but yeah, I mean, we're here. There's some interest, on that level in terms of supporting. I know there have been Raspberry Pis that have been used, in the automotive effort and in CentOS Stream, this sort of space. I don't know exactly what the next steps would be, or who would even be doing the work, or that sort of thing. But I figured I would give this message and ask, well, what does everyone think about for the Raspberry Pi support? Is there any way that we can collaborate? Is it at all feasible? Do we need more resources, etc.?
No, and Joel, thank you for coming. And I know we had some brief contact on this a couple of months ago, and I'm glad you were able to come. We've made pretty extensive use of the Raspberry Pi in some of our early testing with Automotive, so I think there's a real possibility here. I won't rehash the challenges that Raspberry Pi has in the Fedora and then downstream RHEL space beyond just briefly summarizing that it's a good test platform for automotive hardware in a sense, because it has the same pattern of enablement runs ahead of upstreaming of some of the kernel content. And so in that sense, it is arguably a downside for something like Fedora, where Fedora tries to hew very closely to the upstream kernel, which means that you can't do as much with a Raspberry Pi typically, or certainly right after a new model comes out, as you could do with Raspbian or some of the essentially BSP-like distributions that come with that. And that continues to be a challenge, but also, for some of what we're looking at, there's enough functionality there that it works. And as I say, that problem actually mirrors a challenge that I know we have with all of the hardware that's potentially on deck for automotive use, where it can run Linux, but it can't run upstream Linux. And that's usually a prerequisite for Red Hat involvement on a commercial basis. So I know Pierre has been actively doing some work with the Raspberry Pi, and I think Eric has done some as well. Do you guys is there anything you'd want to highlight? Like what is already happening with Raspberry Pi on the automotive side from our work?
Yeah, I think there's probably at least 10 people that have been using Raspberry Pi in some form or another. Yeah, like you can build, Pierre would know about this, but you can build AutoSD for Raspberry Pi and it works great. But there's still lots of things that don't work so well. Like one, for example, remember, I have similar issues with the camera stuff, but Pierre will remember that we still haven't quite got Wayland running on it, and the drivers are there, and yet, long story short, we would definitely appreciate help there, I think, because yeah.
Joel, do you have Raspberry Pi will test? Is that a reasonable like sub headline?
Yeah, I do have a Raspberry Pi, and I can test things. I have tested I think I tested the RHEL kernel. I think I tested the real-time kernel actually. just a boot test really on the Raspberry Pi, and it booted. I needed to get some weird patch from Clark to make the RPM actually build, because it doesn't officially do that. But it didn't crash, it didn't panic. That was good. So yeah,
the very definition of any patch I give you is it's going to be weird.
I was going to say that's one of the most sought after items on the Red Hat scavenger hunt is an oddball patch from Clark. So
yeah,
check that one out.
You probably did that headless, didn't you, Joel? I don't think
yeah.
accelerated. Yeah,
Yeah,
accelerated
no,
graphics isn't there.
Accelerated graphics is probably one of the biggest pain points, definitely on the user end. And I've been in touch with someone in sales, Alexander Jackox, who's very enthusiastic about Raspberry Pis. And he says there's like 20 other solution architects, or people in the sales organization anyway, in North America alone, who are very interested in the Raspberry Pis from a business perspective, in terms of trying to sell some kind of, like, basically many customers are interested in purchasing some kind of solution involving Raspberry Pis, a number of like significant quantities too. And I'm not sure how the product lineup works in terms of what Red Hat sells with regard to support on Fedora. Maybe they have some kind of product related to support or setting up the infrastructure there. I'm not really sure. But he's saying there could be a serious kind of business case for that, and potentially it's something we could bring to Broadcom. I've been trying to schedule something with the Broadcom partner manager to talk about this, but to try and ask about working on open source drivers for the VC6 chipset, the GPU that's on the Raspberry Pi 4, which I think is like unique to the Raspberry Pi 4. And the lack of open source drivers there, from what I understand, is one of the biggest pain points. I don't know if Broadcom would be receptive to this sort of thing. I've heard they haven't really been in the past. Maybe if they could see enough dollar signs in their eyes, that could change their mind. But I've just overall, I've been trying to find different people across the organization, different stakeholders who have an interest, in furthering, Red Hat support on Raspberry Pi. On Raspberry Pi 4, especially Red Hat operating systems and Raspberry Pi. And so I'm slowly starting to build a list, or kind of a loose network. It's not very formal, but it's definitely wider than I expected.
No, and it's an interesting challenge. I think something I've encountered as we've worked through the automotive program and our relationship with Upstream and with the SIG. There's a strong ethos of being clear about what we can and cannot support in Red Hat when we think about our commercial products, but there's also a wider space of things that work, and there's people who use RHEL or RHEL derivatives for something other than production uses, and that there's a clear slot for that with the Raspberry Pi in this arena for sure. Like, it's by far the most easily obtained still. Well, I mean, nothing is easily obtainable right now, but it is still among the most easily obtainable ARM platforms. It's extremely affordable. It's everywhere. Everyone uses it. And I would like us being able to contemplate use of it that is significant but falls short of it, for example, being in a vehicle or in a data center, I think is really useful. So just something to keep in mind. And, perhaps a slight overshare, but, we're an open company. So that's where my head is at with it.
Yep.
Pierre raised his hand as well. Yeah, I just wanted to point out from the technical angle, we have as part of the SIG, all the space we want to experiment with things without having them land on AutoSD, because the idea is that we have, if you look at, that's one of the changes we did to the README of the front page, of the Automotive SIG documentation, is that we have 3 artifacts. We have sample images, we have AutoSD itself, but we also have the RPM, the Automotive RPM, how do I phrase that? The Automotive SIG repositories, RPM repositories, and these repositories are meant to host anything we SIG want to work on or want to experiment with without having any application as to if that's going to land on the product down the line. So we could very well be, developing support for the Raspberry Pi 5 in the Automotive SIG repository, and that has no consequences whether AutoSD and then Red Hat in-vehicle OS down the line will ever support the Raspberry Pi 5. But that's something we can do. We've recently been playing with ways to make the Raspberry Pi work as a USB gadget. That's something that we looked into a little bit. And that's, for me, one of the examples of, I don't know if we want these changes to land in AutoSD versus the RPM repository where we can just play and experiment with them. We're in a place now where the AutoSD is still fluctuant enough, fluid enough that we I think landed them in AutoSD, these changes. But down the line, there will be times where we'll say, well, this branch is going to be AutoSD specific, and the change that land there are meant to go into AutoSD, and then the product down the line. And these other branch here are more experimental work and more, Clark real-time kernel v2 patch, and these ones are experimental. They will come on the Automotive SIG repo, and there is no notion of supporting it from the Red Hat perspective, but that is a notion of making it available to anyone in our community who is interested to look at this. So if you want to further improve the Raspberry Pi support using a real-time kernel, and you want to use the kernel Automotive as your basis for the work, we can easily do that and just leave that kernel in the Automotive repo without necessarily having it impacting AutoSD, and then we can easily merge back and forth changes that are of interest, either from AutoSD into your Raspberry Pi kernel, or from the Raspberry Pi kernel into AutoSD, if that's deemed of interest.
So we could use that. Could we use it as kind of a place to track, issues with, upstream support for the Raspberry Pi, and like as a staging ground for upstreaming different things potentially? Because that's kind of what I've noticed, is that there's not really, the closest there is to a centralized location for upstream support for Raspberry Pi is like a random, like GitHub issue number 40 on like some random person's repo that has like a table that isn't that frequently updated. So, just having some kind of like, more official place to track these things, and maybe to try and gather, engineers, would be a very good progress, I think.
Clark?
Yeah, Pierre, I may have missed it earlier in the presentation, but in the kernel that we're going to track in the Automotive SIG, what's your upstream? Is it, do you have multiple? Are you pulling from Linus's tree, or are you pulling from Arc?
It's your kernel.
Question, Francisco.
It's
Francisco,
kernel Automotive. It could. I think Pierre's point is that doesn't have to be the only thing.
Yeah,
so
I understand that. I guess
AutoSD is going to be the CentOS stream equivalent for the Ribos product, and in that form, it's going to have kernel Automotive. But it can have we have broad leeway to do other things, as long as we don't use copyright code that we don't have permission for, or run afoul of various patent issues that are well known to people in the open source space. So there could be another one.
Yeah, I'm maintaining a branch in kernel Arc that is basically us applying the real-time pat set to Linus's head. It's a little problematic because it's kind of a 3-way, sometimes 4-way merge, and you're trying to decide which one is actually the real one and the latest But that might be a place that we could use as an upstream for what we want to track in CentOS Automotive SIG. The main advantage is it brings in the packaging logic and the weird config logic, and there's actually an automotive variant in that already. Andrew Helene and I are kind of tag teaming that. So I just wanted to offer that up and say, it could be a good upstream for you guys, and it's going to be the upstream for ARC is for my branch is Linus's head and the latest preempt RT patch set from kernel.org. So take that for what it's worth.
This leads me to a question. As today in-house we are maintaining a certain number of automotive related package. We do that through an UBS, and we maintain binary package for example for Fedora 34, 35 or does this project intend to provide, the capability to build those packages for CentOS Stream directly within your CI? For example, for Yocto, we maintain a special layer to build all those tools. But we could also obviously, and internally we already have it, so it's technically it's not a real problem for us. But for example, we on this one we can see that we have all the. I'm not sure. I'm sending a message here. I was willing to push something on the present now. Yeah, so it was sent. Okay. So we maintain package for the CAN or for CAN open or Modbus or some other stuff. What is going to be the strategy for this project? Okay. Should we have like a selection of tools that we want to ship with the distribution? So we want to have that built directly into your CI, or we rather have some external people running, their own CI and proposing packages? Okay. Do we have a strategy?
Well, I'll briefly observe that there are already at least two ways I know of to build packages that could be used against the AutoSD or even CentOS 9 Stream right now. There's the community build system, which is actually where we are building kernel automotive. And then there's also Coper, which is sort of jointly shared with Fedora. And so Philip, when you say build things, do you mean that, in which case the answer is you can already do it, or do you mean something more formally associated with this SIG?
I think it's probably a mix, so you're right, we don't have any issue building the code that we maintain, okay? And in fact, we use Koji to build that, or the OBS from SUSE, it's one or the other, we don't use Copper. But obviously we maintain that for the different version we are supporting, okay? So it's not like if someone from the community is willing to change something and rebuild it, or if you have like a nightly build, okay, we are not going to follow that. Okay, so for example, inside AGL, if you put something on Gerrit, then AGL, and it is approved by the community, they just maintain the package, okay? And not that they maintain the source code, but at least they rebuild them and they ship them on the different versions that they support and so on.
So you would,
but I agree, it's going,
yeah,
it could be both, yeah.
Yeah. You're asking, could there be an AutoSD or a CentOS 9 Stream set, or a set of packages that are auto specific that work on top of AutoSD or CentOS 9 Stream that are part of this SIG? I'm just trying to turn this into something concrete. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something like, for example, the CAN bus is a good example. Okay.
Yeah.
How to retrieve CAN bus. I suppose that the audio could be also a good one, but we could also, for example, there are some elements inside AGL, like the Western compositor, for example, or Toyota has done some mapping on Flutter to write some UI directly with Flutter. All those tools today are only available as Yocto layer, okay, which means that I would say probably very little people have the skill to recompile them with CentOS stream, okay, and so there is a value, I think, in importing those projects. So for us, it's a bit of different because we already maintain the spec file and everything. So we don't, you know, it's only a question of do we want to make it public or not? Because anyway, we already do the job. But if we are talking about like importing Wayland or Compositor or, you know, the pipe wire specific audio configuration for cars that they have, then there is a little more work to make that available directly within this type of SIG.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting, right? And I mean, it's in AGL because right now enough people have seen the value in doing the additional effort and labor required to manage the build instructions in AGL. And you know, you could look at this both ways. We could, what would lead people to want to have a growing set of these packages maintained in such a way that they can be used on top of CentOS 9 Stream or AutoSD, and prior to them being essentially, if we were to then choose to productize that inside of Red Hat, or maybe we never would, but they're still useful in some way. So, yeah.
But Flutter, I think is a good example. Flutter is coming from Sony because this work was done by Sony initially. Then it was ported by Toyota, or you know, through Toyota to Yocto. But you know, maintaining a spec file is not a huge work. Okay, that's the less we can say. But it's still a choice because you cannot maintain everything. So you have to select what you want to have in your distro. Yeah.
Right. No, I think like where I see this fitting in a broad hand-wavy sense is Red Hat has come to this SIG with AutoSD essentially. So we are composing regularly a view of a sort of a CentOS-like equivalent to our automotive product. It's where we are first exposing, for example, the specific kernel that we're going to do for it. And if we are to add any more software that isn't already part of CentOS and RHEL, it would be visible here as well. But there's a second category of thing, which is sort of candidates for that. And I think this happens already with Fedora and CentOS more broadly. There are repositories of software that people want to use enough that they're maintained. Packages are maintained that can be built or installed on top of CentOS 9 Stream or on top of CentOS 8 or on top of Fedora, even if they aren't formally part of that distribution. And what you're saying, what you're talking about sounds vaguely like, where can we put things that maybe they aren't formally part of something that Red Hat is productizing, but that we want to be able, we want to show that they could be, or they could just be something that's used with it. I think we're seeing in other contexts, we're seeing some interest in that as well. Like and it might be, if we can, as a SIG, come up with a way that makes it clearer for how, Pierre's, go ahead, Pierre, you're raising your hand.
That's exactly what the automotive SIG repos are for.
Yeah. So Philip says, I want to start maintaining a AutoSD build of something that isn't in CentOS or AutoSD. How do I do it? That would be the user story. As a SIG member, I would like to start maintaining a package that is new, that isn't part of CentOS, and I'd like it to continue to work on top of AutoSD. That's something to sink our teeth into. Yeah.
We need to have documentation on that because everything is in place today. We just are lacking a documentation oriented to our SIG because we can point people to the CentOS SIG guide, which has all the lists of information.
Yeah.
But having something a little bit more tailored to our SIG would be nice. But everything is in place. If you want to, if tomorrow you come to us with a spec file and a library, that the one concern is going to be licensing. It has to respect the licenses that the CentOS project can distribute, build and distribute. So free and open source software. But if you come tomorrow with something and we have the space, we have the resources, we can build them and make them available in our PM repo. That is for anyone in the SIG to consume.
I mean, we have already sort of done this for things like DLT Daemon and vSOM IP, although those were actually added to Fedora and then inherited to EPEL. And that's another path you can take with that kind of change.
I was going to ask though, like I suspect one issue here may be that it's relatively simple for some of us to do this, and it's opaque and unclear how to do it for others. It gets to Pierre's documentation point. And I'm going to ask Owen, like, Philip, does OBS make this really easy? Is it trivially simple to maintain, like start adding, I've said my own?
Let's say it is not more complex than Koji, okay?
Okay.
And, okay. And
the English idiom
both.
I'm aware of that is damning by faint praise.
No, but you know,
Yes.
at least internally we have a factory on top of Koji. So for us, maintaining package on top of Koji for you know Red Hat and CentOS is simple, okay? But OBS has a couple of features that initially are lacking inside Koji, like for example the notion of services, where you can download NPM before building a package, okay, and not wait for your network to be switched down when you start building, and then your wget fail. So it's not a bad tool, but honestly, it's not an easy to use tool, okay?
Right.
Those tools are never simple, okay? It's a CI/CD chain. But in this case, we built this with our Red Pest factory that is a superset on top of Koji and other tools.
Yeah. Okay. So it's more about people often invest the time in becoming familiar with and proficient in preparing things for one of these build system environments, and there's less cross-pollination than you might think. This is what I've always liked about Cooper, by the way, is that it has the easiest on-ramp of the ones that I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all of them, you know, you still have to write the spec file, understand, and we cross-compile everything in our case, okay, because we do cross-compilation. So even if we rewrote the macro in such a way that normally it is transparent when you import a spec file, sometimes you have some surprise, you know, where, you know, the name of the compiler is hard written or that type of thing. So it's so you always have few things to fix that. There is another element that we also are doing right now, but this one is easier for us and probably not so interesting for the team, even if at the end of the day, some user might be interested in. We maintain a bunch of board support package, okay? And today, I'm not sure how much we have, but we probably close of 20, okay? For different boards that include Qualcomm, TI, NXP, you know, ST, Renesas, and so on. And we also have the capability to run CentOS stream on top of that, okay? But in this case, even if we can reuse the kernel configuration of the SIG to make sure that we share the same functionality, most of the time you are locked in a specific kernel version because of the vendor, okay? And so in this case, we have the same kernel configuration, but potentially we have different kernel, even if we still continue using the same packages, okay? And so this part, I think, cannot be built inside the SIG CI system, but potentially it could be meaningful for people to have the capability to download the board support package for their specific board from somewhere.
I just did a time check, and I'm realizing as much as
I
would
relate,
like to talk.
Quite a bit over time, but it's a great discussion, and I think it's a good one. Maybe this is a good time to leave off, and we can pick it up again in 2 weeks at the next CentOS SIG office hours.
Philip, do you want to bring these to the mailing list, and maybe we can discuss this async a little bit as well? I mean, the mailing list could use a little bit more activity, so
a little bit.
Don't necessarily have to wait 2 weeks.
It's very much a status update mailing list.
We'll offer one new RPM build package for every 10 mailing lists. I should say
incentives. Yeah.
Okie doke.
With a bonus at 100. Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Guy, and
Thanks,
have
Al.
a nice weekend. And let's talk in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Al.
Great. Thank you all.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, bye.
Have a great weekend.
Have fun.